Ladies and gentlemen, something extraordinary is unfolding. Something bigger than a headline, bigger than a scandal, and bigger than any single political figure. A seismic shift is shaking the foundations of power, money, and influence in America, and most people haven't even noticed the ground moving beneath their feet. Tonight, we pull back the curtain, not on rumors, not on noise, but on the deeper forces at play, the strategies, the stakes, and the staggering scale of what's happening right now. Because if we don't understand these forces, we can't prepare for what comes next. And if we don't prepare, we won't stand a chance. This isn't about left or right. This is about impact. This is about hidden moves that shape our future. This is about what power looks like when no one is watching. So, buckle in. What you're about to hear isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. Power moves in silence because real influence doesn't announce itself. It accumulates while everyone else is distracted. Men often learn this lesson the hard way. The loudest person in the room rarely holds the real leverage. What shapes outcomes is the decision made quietly at midnight, the strategy crafted without applause, the resilience built without witnesses. Quiet power isn't passive, it's intentional. It's the discipline to prepare while others seek attention, and the patience to act only when the moment creates maximum impact. Women understand this dynamic too, often noticing patterns men overlook. They see how silence can be a shield, a strategy, or a warning. They observe the difference between confidence and noise, between a man who broadcasts strength and a man who embodies it. To them, silent power in men often reflects emotional control, direction, and self-trust, qualities that signal real security rather than the performance of it. Men, on the other hand, feel the pressure of silent power differently. They sense the unseen competition, the hidden agendas, the unspoken judgments. They know that the biggest shifts in life, relationships, careers, loyalty, influence, rarely come with a headline. They arrive quietly, changing everything before you even realize the ground is moving. The strategy behind the shockwave begins long before anyone notices the impact, because every major shift is born from decisions made in the shadows. Men often underestimate how much planning, positioning, and psychological leverage shape the world around them. They focus on the visible outcome, not the invisible architecture. But true strategy is slow, deliberate, and built layer by layer, designed to hit all at once when the time is right. What looks sudden is usually the final move in a long, quiet game. Women interpret strategy differently, often recognizing the emotional cues men miss. They see how intention reveals itself in patterns, not declarations. They notice when a man's actions no longer align with his words, when his energy shifts, or when he begins preparing for something he hasn't yet spoken aloud. To them, strategy is not just logic. It's emotional forecasting. It's reading the storm before it forms. Men, however, feel strategy as pressure. They sense the building tension, the unspoken competition, the way a single disruption can redefine their identity or status. They understand that shockwaves don't just shake systems, they shake confidence, relationships, and purpose. And when they finally hit, men often realize the real strategy wasn't about winning quickly, but about positioning quietly for the moment that changes everything. Money rewrites the rules because it changes what people fear, what they chase, and what they can walk away from without hesitation. Men feel this shift more intensely than they admit because money often becomes the scoreboard they measure themselves against. It alters how they make decisions, how they negotiate risk, and even how they define their own worth. When resources expand, options expand. And when options expand, the power dynamics around them quietly rearrange themselves, sometimes in their favor, sometimes against them, but always reshaped. Women observe how money transforms behavior in ways men rarely acknowledge. They notice how financial security can soften ego or inflate it, how it influences a man's confidence, presence, and emotional availability. They see the difference between men who use money as a tool for growth and those who use it as armor to hide insecurity. In their eyes, money doesn't just rewrite rules, it exposes motives, intentions, and character. Men, on the other hand, experience these changes as a deep internal shift. They feel the weight of responsibility grow heavier or lighter depending on what they control. They understand that money doesn't simply change circumstances. It changes expectations, both from others and from themselves. And once those expectations shift, the rules of engagement in relationships, ambition, and influence are never the same again. Influence becomes invisible. The moment it stops relying on presence and starts relying on perception. Men often misunderstand this shift, believing influence is about being seen, heard, or recognized. But the most powerful influence operates below awareness, shaping choices without force, guiding outcomes without commands, and shifting behavior without confrontation. It's the kind of influence that isn't measured by applause, but by the quiet certainty that others are adjusting themselves around you. Even when you're not in the room, women recognize invisible influence intuitively because they're conditioned to feel subtle shifts long before they're acknowledged. They notice when a man starts carrying himself differently, when his boundaries sharpen, or when his confidence becomes grounded instead of loud. To them, invisible influence reveals itself in the way a man's presence lingers after he leaves, in how his actions recalibrate the emotional tone of the environment, and in how others mirror his steadiness or react to his silence. Men, however, experience invisible influence as a kind of internal evolution. They feel themselves moving from needing validation to setting direction, from reacting to leading without announcing it. They sense the moment their value is no longer tied to effort, but to identity. And in that shift, they realize influence isn't something you display. It's something you become. The cost of not paying attention is that the most important shifts in life don't wait for you to catch up. They simply move on without you. Men often learn this through disruption, a relationship that suddenly feels distant, an opportunity that quietly disappears, or a competitor who seemed irrelevant until he wasn't. When men overlook the subtle signs, they don't just miss information, they miss the chance to adapt before the impact hits. Ignoring the small signals leads to big consequences because life doesn't pause for anyone's delay. Women witness these moments differently, often noticing the early warnings men brush off. They see when a man starts disconnecting from his purpose, when his priorities drift, or when his frustrations grow roots beneath the surface. They recognize the unspoken fatigue, the avoided conversations, the emotional shortcuts men take when they feel overwhelmed but won't admit it. From their perspective, not paying attention isn't just dangerous, it's revealing. It shows where a man's focus is fractured and where his blind spots quietly grow. Men, however, internalize these costs with a sense of regret more than anything else. They feel the sting of realizing they were present but not aware, involved but not engaged. They understand too late that attention is not about looking, it's about noticing. It's about recognizing when someone needs reassurance, when a shift in the environment signals a larger threat, or when their own intuition whispers a warning they've trained themselves to ignore. In the end, what men fail to notice often becomes the very thing that changes their lives the most. What we must do before the next move hits begins with learning to recognize the patterns that quietly shape our world, long before they break the surface. Men often move through life reacting to what's obvious instead of preparing for what's emerging. They wait for the disruption, the shock, the undeniable proof before they adjust. But the next move, whether in relationships, career, or personal growth, never announces itself with clarity. Preparation starts with sharpening awareness, noticing shifts in behavior, energy, and intention long before they become unavoidable. Women see these transitions from another angle, often sensing the emotional and psychological undercurrents men overlook. They notice when a man's drive begins to soften, when his sense of purpose fades, or when he becomes distracted by noise instead of grounded in direction. They observe how men unconsciously armor themselves when they feel unprepared, how they withdraw when life pressures them, and how they rely on control when adaptability is what's actually required. To them, preparation is not about anticipating attack. It's about understanding the emotional landscape before the storm forms. Men experience this preparation as a tension between who they are and who they know they need to become. They feel the pull to grow, to strengthen, to evolve, but often delay until life forces the issue. What they must do before the next move hits is confront the areas they avoid, their fears, their blind spots, their unspoken insecurities. They need to build capacity before they need it, discipline before they rely on it, and clarity before they're tested. Because when the next shift arrives, whether subtle or seismic, the man who took time to prepare won't be thrown off course. He'll simply step into the moment he built himself for, moving with intention instead of panic, direction instead of reaction, and strength instead of noise.